committee for bringing it, or the leader of majority. And I also want to indicate at the onset that it's a good thing that now we are having a legislative framework on disaster risk management. Indeed, I'm actually glad that it's clarified, because I remember very clearly we had this bill in the last parliament, but I do notice that it had lapsed. Mr. Speaker, because most people have spoken a lot to the issue of disaster risk management, I just wanted to talk about some of the issues that I've seen that are thorny in the bill. One of them, which I was actually intervening because I didn't know that I would have the time, is on the issue of definition of disaster, that because they have included the word local, it actually limits, because then a disaster can happen that is beyond local. But when you use the word local, it means it limits how we respond when you actually make disaster a local affair. And we have seen from experience, and even from what the majority leader had given, for example, of COVID. Do you classify COVID as a local issue, or is it a national issue? Then, Mr. Speaker, one of the other issues that I've actually picked that is of concern for me also is the definition of disaster risk management. And I'm encouraging the committee, even though I've proposed amendments already, that they should expand it to include having in place a permanent structure of disaster risk management at the county and national level, identifying and mapping disaster-prone or vulnerable areas, situations of people as part of management, because we already know as a country which areas are very prone to flooding, for instance, but we always operate like it's a shock when it happens. And then issuing early warning of imminent disaster. Mr. Speaker, if you go even to BBC and other areas now, you actually see alerts that are issued all the time. And even if you look at today's I think media, I don't know if it was Nation or what, that I was reading, the US is already giving an alert on a possible terrorist attack in Somalia. That is actually a preparation for disaster. Why don't we have things like that? And then relocating populations in case of imminent disasters, and using technology to better management disaster. Mr. Speaker, one time when we were in Indonesia with the Committee of Budget, I woke up in the night, I was sleeping, and I actually thought I'd overslept and forgotten to switch off my TV. And Mr. Speaker, after a while, I actually discovered that it was an automated system coming through the TV that was warning us that there has just been an earthquake of this magnitude, and we should go out and we should do XYZ, you know, for a focal point. And Mr. Speaker, by the time I was walking down, I think God gave me an amazing ability to sleep. I met people walking up. I had slept through the earthquake. And when I reached, I found people that were in centralized places. Should we have an earthquake in Kenya, I can tell you it will be shocking how we'd react, because we don't have those centralized places. In Indonesia, everybody knows there's an earthquake, every hotel has a centralized area. We should also have those automated systems even in our hotels, not just for earthquakes, but for other things. I'd want to say, for instance, my own county, Homa Bay, is an earthquake-prone area, but we have sightings. I know Honorable Gladys will be doing something about it. She's just done her first year. But in terms of the law, those are the things that we need to be putting. Mr. Speaker, the other issue that is of concern to me is the issue of the definition again of emergency preparedness. And I'm encouraging the committee that what we need to add as part of emergency preparedness is having a policy in place for both the national and the county government, but also having in place a monitoring system for both the county and national government, having in place an early warning system, a continuous public education and awareness to the public on disaster risk response, including emergency numbers and centers, and having in place facilities and equipment for effective and quick response in case of disasters, including fire trucks, land, water, and air ambulatory services. Mr. Speaker, right now, if we were to have a disaster in Fangano Island, would actually have a challenge because we don't have a boat ambulatory system. I know we've raised it with our governor and she said she will bring it, but I'm not just saying it in relation to Homa Bay County. What about other areas that are, covered by water? If there's an emergency or a disaster, how do you respond quickly? And because now the systems that we have there are mainly private. And even for us to mobilize them, you might find the ferry is in Kisumu or wherever, and they are slow. If you are dealing with disasters, you need quick response. So for me, those are some of the issues that I'd want. Again, in clause 4, one of the guiding principles should be protecting vulnerable groups, including women, children, persons with disabilities, and the elderly in cases of disasters. Because we have not mentioned them specifically, but disaster affects different groups differently. When you have women and children, when you have disasters, women will be prone to sexual abuse and all other kind of issues. How do we respond to women in disasters like that, where they no longer have any habitation and whatever? What about menstrual hygiene and things like that when you have disasters? And then I'm also suggesting that we need to have the Minister for Gender because of that issue in the management authority. I know we are also trying to make it smaller, but even as we make it smaller, we need to have the Minister for Gender, who mercifully a lot of times also doubles up as the one in charge of the young person. But I know that now it's not the same, but it would be important. And then, Chair, on the issue of governance, it's an issue that I've been speaking to a lot on this floor, but I will re-emphasize it. Chair, we have this tendency that you find one Kenyan in 2 boards, or in serving a government office, but also in a board. When there are many Kenyans who don't have anything, why don't they also serve in those boards? Or we have one person that have exceptional intellectual capacities. Those are things that we also must address. We must also, in terms of governance, one of the other issues that we must also look at is the way we phrase the powers that we give the chair of the board. And one of the powers that we need to give the board is not to dismiss somebody for absenting themselves, but without justification. Chair, one of the other things that I'd want to say is also that we need to ensure that we take a zebra approach when we are appointing the boards or the officers to any of the bodies. And so that if you have a male chair, you should have a female vice, and vice versa. Mr. Speaker, I've written a few of the issues. I'm not going to mention all of them, but I just want to complete by saying one of the things that I've told you before. I've sponsored the Victim Protection Act. And one of the clauses in the Victim Protection Act is the issue of victimization, mass victimization arising from a crime. So for instance, the issue of terrorism. And one of the things it does, it says that, this is actually born of the fact that when we have seen all the times that we have seen terrorist attacks, how have we responded as a country? Every single person has walked in there to respond, not the officers. Secondly, in their response, we don't preserve the evidence. We don't also look at the victim. We don't see, like what you see if you actually look at a lot of the programs in the US or other areas, that they will preserve the dress that the person is wearing for purposes of identification or any other identifying features. I was very shocked one time when I went to Kenyatta National Hospital, and I saw recently that they wanted to dispose of bodies. And they were telling people to just come and dispose of bodies. And I said, and I asked them, do you keep in such cases of disposals any evidence that when somebody one time wants to identify a person who is lost, they can do that? And they said, no, they don't have. I was actually shocked. So that is why, for instance, one of the people who used to be an ODM member called Matunga, who disappeared from Gwasi, to date can't be traced because there is no DNA evidence. This applies to mass victimization as well. So, Mr. Speaker, I've proposed several amendments to this bill. It is a good bill. It is a timely bill. I encourage the majority speaker to be more futuristic and stop looking backwards and always blaming other people, including Honorable Matiangi, because the country has moved on. With those few remarks, I support.
Thank you, Honorable Millie Odhiambo. Always very informative. The Honorable Dr. Suzanne Kiamba, the MP for Makueni.
Well, I think it is in order to have a disaster management authority, I wish to raise some few concerns. And one of the concerns I wish to raise is the fact that in this country we are working very hard to create very many structures. We've made so many structures that ends up having no budget or money to do what we wish them to do. I want to give